Today, I'd like to continue our discussion of the book of Exodus and take a look at chapter 18. We've been involved in this pilgrimage that the Jewish people have been taking out of Egypt, and it's good to see exactly what they've been up to here. In chapter 18, it's kind of a little bit of a break from the journey or the pilgrimage, and we get a little bit of the family background of Moses. So we see Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. He heard all about the wonderful things that were happening. He was in Midian, but he heard all of these great things that Moses was doing, very impressed by it. And he decided to take Zipporah, Moses' wife, and his two sons, Gershon and Eleazar, to meet Moses in the desert. Kind of an interesting dynamic here in the sense that Moses sort of leaves his wife. We don't hear anything about the wife when he's in Egypt, and leaves his sons. Kind of you get the impression that Jethro is doing more of the father role in terms of raising the sons. But anyway, Jethro hears about this and he says, well, let's go and let's meet with Moses and see what's happening. So Moses recounts all of the wonderful things that God had done for them in Egypt, and how God had led the people to freedom. So a very impressive story, and that must have been very moving for Jethro and Zipporah and Gershon and Eleazar to hear all of these wonderful things that Moses was able to accomplish. So Jethro is really kind of overwhelmed by this, and he gives praise to God, and he says, wow, this is great that you're able to do all these things. This is wonderful, Moses, that you're able to accomplish all this. And so Jethro, because of this, because of these great accomplishments, he offers a holocaust and other sacrifices to God, which was kind of the normal reaction to this type of amazing news about an intervention by God, was to give thanks to God and praise to God. And even in his role as a priest of Midian, certainly he would have been familiar with offering these sacrifices, similar parallel to what the Jewish people would have been doing in terms of offering sacrifices to God. And it was a way of saying thanks to God. It was a way of acknowledging God's power. It was a way of saying, God, you've done some wonderful things here, and I just want to show my gratitude, my appreciation for what you have been able to accomplish through us. And it's just a beautiful sense of acknowledgement for God and God's power. So they shared a meal together after the sacrifice, which was kind of a typical custom. They would offer the sacrifice, and they would take some of the food and share that together, share that meal together. And Aaron and the elders came to join in the meal, so it wasn't just Moses, it was his brother Aaron, it was a lot of the significant people, the elders, those who would be very close to Moses and Aaron, and who would execute a lot of the commands that God would give to Moses, and the elders would put that into practice with the people. So they were there and they were sharing this meal together. And the next day, Jethro observed Moses. And Moses was sort of sitting in judgment for the people. And he was sitting from morning until evening, giving his whole day for this as people came and they had different questions that they wanted answered, different tensions that may have arisen among the people and disputes that had to be settled. And these would all be brought to Moses, and Moses would make a judgment about them. It was kind of like the final arbiter of these conflicts that would arise. And Moses would pray about the conflict, pray about the situation, and then bring it to God, and then get back to them with what God thought was the right thing to do. So Jethro was observing this, and he says, well, Moses, I just want to share some possible ideas in terms of handling this situation. And he said, what you really should do is pick some able men, some God-fearing men, and set them up as officers over the different groups, and divide them into groups of thousands, then smaller groups of hundreds of officers over them, smaller groups of 50s, have an official over them, and then smaller groups of 10s, and have someone over them. So he's talking about a structure, a way of organizing it, so that it would be efficient, so that the people's concerns could be heard, and they could be really resolved on the smallest level. We call this, in terms of Catholic social justice teaching, the principle of subsidiarity. What can be solved on a lower level should obviously be handled on that level. It's more efficient, it's more direct, it's more personal. People would have knowledge of one another and some of those conflicts, and they could really resolve them in a much more efficient fashion. So it seemed like that, this would be a good way to organize things. So what could happen is that if there was a decision that was a more complicated decision, involved something more far-reaching, that could be brought to Moses, and he could adjudicate that and resolve it. But for the minor, everyday conflicts that arise, do it on that level where those elders, those people in charge, would be closer to the people and know the situation, know them personally probably as well, and could resolve it in a much better fashion. This way, what would happen is the burden would be taken off of Moses, because that's hard for him, sitting from morning till evening, hearing all these cases. That puts a big burden on him as a leader. And Moses listened to that advice and said, Jethro, you got some good points there. That makes sense. It's going to free me up, and it's going to be easier for the people to go to those that they're closer with. So it really makes sense all around. And then at the end of the chapter, we see him finally saying goodbye to Jethro. So we get a sense of this is we get really an awareness of family connections. The idea of Moses and his father-in-law, again, spending time with his wife and his children, all of those very important aspects of Moses and his personal life, obviously. But really, we don't get that sense of Moses as a father, as a husband, as much as we see Moses as a leader. And even in this chapter where he's having the encounter with Jethro, really Jethro is speaking more to what had been done, the marvelous deeds that had been accomplished, and the Holocaust that's offered to acknowledge that. And then also, of course, the idea of organizing things in a much more efficient fashion. We get a sense of both of those things, but not as much as Moses with his children, Moses with his wife, that sense. We don't have really that idea of him in that role. And that was obviously not the intention of the biblical author. It might be something that we might look for and want to know more about. But the biblical author and authors are really looking at it in terms of Moses leading the people, and Moses having that sense of communication with God, that sense of that personal relationship with God that he then brings to the people. And of course, it reminds us of that first person in the Hebrew scriptures who said yes to God, who had that deep personal relationship with God, and that, of course, is our own beloved Father Abraham. Father Abraham had many friends. Many friends had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. God bless. Praise the Lord.